That's
All
okay.
right, cool. Welcome everybody to the Don't Sing podcast. Today I have Shelley Kenow. She is a educator specifically involved in special education. She's been involved in special education for over 25 years. She's also a published author, and today she's going to give us a little bit of insight into that world, what it means to be a special educator, um, a little insight into what an individualized education program is and how you go about doing that, and just giving us a little context so we can erase some stigmas around what special education is. um but first things first, Shelley, where did you grow up?
In Southern Illinois.
Nice. So growing up as a kid, was there even such thing as special education when you were growing up?
There was, but not until I was around upper elementary, middle school ages. The law actually came into effect around the time that I entered kindergarten,
Okay.
but I wasn't aware of anyone in my school being in special education in the early grades. Um, it turns out, though, that when I was in third grade, second and third grade, where my classrooms were, where the special education students were, was just down a little hallway from those rooms,
Okay.
but it was tucked away in that hallway. And I had no idea they were there until, like I said, around upper, probably sixth, seventh, eighth grade.
Right. So when you finally got into special education, what were some of the preconceived notions you had going into it that you had to unlearn or get more information about?
That is an excellent question, and one I am so glad that you asked, because I have my own podcast now. And the reason I
Hmm.
have my own podcast is to try to destigmatize, as you talked about earlier, the fact that we all have these cognitive biases. They develop for a myriad of different reasons. And when I was growing up, I'd had the thought about teaching special education, but kept having this little voice inside say, oh, you're not going to have high enough expectations. Oh, you're not going to know enough about them. You're not going to have anything to connect with them and make a bond with them. You're not going to be happy for them. You're going to feel sorry for them because they have this disability or that disability, or they're just eligible for special education. And so I had a lot of incorrect biases.
Hmm.
And once I didn't actually jump into special education immediately. Once I entered college, I was going for a general education degree. And then
Hmm.
I kept finding myself getting put into situations where I was working with kids who learned differently, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize that those were the kids who would have been eligible or would be eligible for special education. So after several job experiences and finding out that I loved working with kids who learned differently and who behaved differently,
Yeah.
then I changed my degree to go into special education instead of just general education.
Yeah. It's something I feel like, especially in recent times, that we've become a little tiny bit more aware and vocal about. Um, Me growing up as a kid, I grew up in the early 2000s, so I definitely had kids that had IEPs and were taught by special educators in my class, but it wasn't very much something that it was kind of taboo to speak on. It was
Mm-hmm.
like if you even kind of had a question about it, it was viewed as you being, kind of disrespectful in a way.
Right.
Um, and I think that although they are learning in an alternative format than the rest of the kids, I liked how, well, in my school specifically, they would still integrate everyone together.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone would be in the same classrooms. It wouldn't be like a stark difference between their schedule and everybody else's schedule.
Right.
And I think that we do need to have more dialogues about it because a lot of kids are just curious. And I bet the kids that are in special education want want to be explained without having to explain themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And just if the more people are aware and the more it's not a taboo thing to speak on, I feel like, that could just lead to more self-esteem in those kids and also just a safer environment in school.
Absolutely. And I think we as adults have to get past the idea that if someone, especially a child, asks, well, why does Shelley go out of the room at this time? Or
Hmm.
why does Shelley look differently than I do? Or why does Shelley talk differently than I do? That instead of saying, oh no, we don't talk about that, or oh, you're embarrassing yourself, or you're embarrassing me as the adult, answer the question
Yeah.
honestly at the developmental level of the person you're talking to. I mean, if you're just talking to a kindergartner or first grader, maybe just saying, well, because they have to get not that they have, they get a little bit of extra support that they need because they learn a little bit different, and just leave it at that. Maybe if you're talking upper elementary, middle school grades, maybe you go into it a little bit more because of that social side of things, that, hey,
Hmm.
that doesn't make them any different than you because they need a little different way of learning or a little different way of being taught. They'd still be a great friend. And
Yeah.
we spend in special education so many hours working on our kids who are eligible for special education, teaching them how to interact with their general education peers, how to get along in society, trying to get their education to look as much like the general education as we can. But we don't spend near enough time teaching our general education students about our kids who are eligible for special education. And I
Hmm.
think that would absolutely take care of a lot of what you just mentioned, the fact that we all learn different. It's okay. We might look different. You put on glasses just before we started today.
Yeah.
I have to wear mine all the time. There are some people who wear glasses. There are some people who get braces on their teeth. There are some people who have to, have their arm in a sling because they've broken their arm.
Hmm.
All of these things are supports, but that person is a person first,
Right.
and get to know them, and don't worry about some label that they might have on their name.
Yes, indeed. I believe that, you know, one of the things I just want to get demystified right off the bat is that a lot of young kids, and it kind of dissipates as you get older and you learn more, but like a lot of kids in elementary school and grade school, if they view kids in special education as, less intelligent, or they'll view them as, not capable of learning at a certain rate of speed. And special education is so much more diverse and nuanced than that. Um, there's a lot of kids in special education that are actually uh, savants and
Mhm.
actually love to learn and actually absorb information faster than a lot of kids in general education. It's just that there's also some kids that don't answer the social cues as quickly as kids in general education, or just might be very traumatized from something that happened to them as a younger
Yes.
child that, makes them not comfortable in social settings. But it's like you said before, it's a tool, it's a support system, it's something that should be used in a positive connotation. I mean, if you broke your arm and you came to school and you just had a arm leaning to the side without a cast on it, people kind of look at you strange, like, why don't you go to the doctor and get a cast on it?
Exactly.
Yeah, we should look at special education in the same light. It's support. And if you all want to help each other, if we all want to live in a society where if someone falls down, you willing to pick them up. I mean, we need systems like these. We need more systems like these, and we also need more special educators that are willing to help these kids in need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a massive teacher shortage across the country, but we have had a special education teacher shortage for as long as I've been in education. There have
Mhm.
never been enough special education teachers. And so now, with the overall teacher shortage, that's even worse. And I think
Yeah.
the idea of that these kids are less than is 100% incorrect. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that we need to demystify that, because there are criteria for someone to be eligible for one of the categories under the special education law. And
Yeah.
for the largest category of students that are served, which is specific learning disability, the student has to have average or above average intelligence in order to even be considered for that category. So
Right.
that right there should just demystify the stigma completely,
Yeah.
because they have to have average or above average intelligence. There's really only one category that has part of its criteria of being having a lesser intelligence level than the average, actually. And to think about the fact that in education, we are taught as we go through and get our education licenses that 80 to 85% of our students are going to get it the way that we are being taught in college to teach to our students. So that's
Right.
15 to 20% of our population who aren't going to get it just based on the way that it's taught. That has
Right.
nothing even to take into consideration that there might be an underlying disability happening, or, as you mentioned, trauma.
Mm,
Since the pandemic, we see so much of that now because so many of our kids were traumatized. I mean, so many of the adults were traumatized by what happened during that time period.
yeah.
And so to think that um, somebody has a lower intelligence level because they qualify for special education is the absolute biggest problem I think there is with special education. Because I think even a lot
Yeah.
of teachers have that idea,
Yeah.
and that really needs to be changed.
Yeah. And through my personal experience going through school, um, I've had teachers that, you know, not only have that stigma, but they're kind of shameful about how they go uh, putting a spotlight on these kids. Like I've seen instances where teachers will make certain kids sit in the front of the classroom. Like they everyone else can sit where they want, but this specific kid has to have an assigned seat. Um, like just small little acts of kind of just poking fun at somebody or making something larger than what it is, just based on a preconceived notion that's not based in any reality or truth. And I think the more that educators are aware of that, then it will pass down onto the kids because, they're leading with example. Um, but then parents as well. I think it's a certain duty and responsibility for parents of kids in general education to inform their children on
Yes.
special education. My mom and my grandmother are educators, and they've both made a concerted effort to let me know that everybody learns differently. You may learn at a certain pace in one subject and learn at a completely different pace in another subject. Uh, I love history and math, for instance, but science it takes me three times as long. It's
Right.
such a case by case basis, and I think what special education does open a door into is to not only look at kids who qualify for it, but I think it should open the door for just to take a more nuanced look at all students in general and kind of revamp the way that kids are taught in like this blanket overhaul format where there's standards and there's outcomes, and these are determine if your child is eligible to move on to the next grade. I think every kid is different. Every kid learns in a different way at a different speed, no matter if they're in special education or in general education. And I think a lot of habits and um, practices that you guys do in special education should honestly be looked at to be transferred over to general education.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And we do that all the time in society. I mean, if you think about the curb cutouts, those were originally put in there for people in wheelchairs to get across, from one side of the street to the other side of the street a little bit easier. But
Hmm.
all kinds of people in the population use that. Kids on skateboards, kids on scooters,
Yeah.
people walking with a cane, people that have, are walking with no support whatsoever, but it's just easier for them to go up that tiny little ramp than to step up onto the curb.
Mm-hmm.
And, putting a ramp in by an area where there are steps going into a location. Again, lots of people use that ramp, and anybody could use the ramp, but not everybody
Yeah,
can use the steps.
right. It's just making a world that's more inclusive in general. Um,
Hmm. Absolutely, 100%.
can you kind of explain what is an individualized education program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the letters that we use to represent that are IEP. And as you said, individualized education program. Some people say plan, but the law says program, but it's interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the document that drives special education. There's another document that many students receive, which is called a Section 504 plan. And
Mm-hmm.
basic difference between a Section 504 plan and an IEP is they're both data driven. They're both talking about the students' present levels and what kind of supports the students' needs. But the IEP will have specially designed instruction that have goals and objectives written towards that specially designed instruction.
Okay.
And so then there's specific members for the IEP team. There has to be a general education teacher, a special education teacher, the parent, someone from the school who can make decisions, and then someone who can interpret test results. And that group of people, at a minimum, get together and decide what should go into this IEP for this particular student. And it should be very individualized to that student, all the way from, as I mentioned, those present levels of performance to exactly the accommodations, how they're going to be carried out, who's going to carry them out, where are they going to be carried out. I actually have on my website, and I hope this is okay that I plug this really quick, but I
Definitely.
have
Yeah.
a free accommodations and modifications checklist on my website. And you just go to shelleykenow.com/freebies and you can find that. And that'll help you get very specific with those accommodations and modifications. And then when you're writing goals and objectives, you want to have sort of the same concept that you still have to be very specific. What is it that is our baseline? What does this child already know about this particular skill? And then where do we expect that child to be able to get to with these supports by the end of this IEP time period that we put on here, whether that's the full length of the IEP, which is um, has to be reviewed at least once a year by the school system, but it never expires. So if you're a parent listening, or even if you're someone in the school system listening, and you say, or you've heard that IEPs expire, that's wrong. They don't
Mm,
expire. The
okay.
only time an IEP becomes invalid is when a student graduates from school, either with, at the senior level or if they age out, or if there's been a full evaluation and those members of that team that I mentioned before gather together, look over all the information, and determine that that student is no longer eligible for special education.
All right.
Other than that, what happens and why school districts want to say that IEPs expire is because they haven't, or they're not about to hit that 1 year mark from when the last IEP was written. So what's happening is the school becomes non-compliant because they didn't review and revise the IEP at least once in a year. The
Mm,
IEP itself doesn't expire.
okay. That's important to, you know, point out because um, a lot of parents, they're going to take what the school says at their word. And
Mm-hmm.
um, when your child is accustomed to a certain way of learning and then the school is telling them, well, it's expired, it's nothing we could do on our part, who's actually liable for it to be, upheld. And I think that, parents are kind of at a point now where, a lot of parents, I assume, are like kind of scared because, especially because of COVID and what happened with the pandemic. A lot of kids in all types of education are behind. And
Right.
if you were, you know, I was already out of school when the pandemic happened, so I don't really know even to the degree of how much it impacted children. But I know that, like, if you were a fourth grader in 2020, you're about to go into high school now, and
Right.
two two of those years were just completely taken away from you, you know,
Yes.
and depending on where you lived, it might even be even longer. So it's I can only imagine how that affected kids in special education um, who really depend on that support system, and online classes wouldn't be, a viable thing for them. They really need that person next to them to guide them and to direct them. How have you kind of seen the impact on special education with the pandemic?
Exactly what you said. Even the general education population, the studies are showing that they are 2 years behind
Mm,
socially, emotionally, and academically, even though they were getting the academics online.
yeah,
The special education population, it's actually affecting approximately the same, if not a little bit less, because they were already getting some extra supports, and so therefore they were better. What am I trying to say? Kind of not. I don't want to say inoculated. That's not the word I want. They were better protected because they had already kind of been in that bubble
yeah,
of, hey, I know if I need help, I'm going to go ask this person. Or
right,
if I, don't quite understand something, I'm going to ask this person. And a lot of our general education kids didn't have that. They didn't know what to do
yeah,
with that. So some of our special education kids actually fared better because of that
mm,
during the pandemic. And also the social side of things. For a lot of our kids in special education, the social side, as you mentioned before, the getting picked on, the being singled out, that
yeah,
stigmatism or stigma that goes with having an eligibility for special education. So when they weren't having to go to a physical location every day and they weren't having to get that experience every day, a lot of them um, actually had a better school experience.
mm,
So it
yeah,
actually, I think, overall affected the general education population a slight bit more than maybe
mm.
the special education.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. They're probably, and one thing you pointed out is that they aren't afraid to ask for help. They're used to asking for guidance and assistance. And that's something that should be normalized in
Mm-hmm.
children. I know from personal experience, I definitely was not raising my hand in class unless I knew the answer. Um,
Right.
that's a habit that a lot of kids pick up that they need to understand is not okay. It's okay not to know something. You're going to school to learn.
Exactly.
So, I mean, you want to have that, you know, self esteem to raise your hand and ask, well, I don't know this. Because one thing I've learned, and even my educators told me this, if you're brave enough to raise your hand and ask that question, you're not the only one in the room that has that same question. You're probably helping a
Absolutely.
lot of other kids out. And it's it's tough to hear that the kids are behind, especially emotionally and socially, because a lot of those years are very formative in how you learn how to interact with other kids and gaining a lot of friends and being behind. And even like I can only imagine, like, if you're a kid, like, probably academics are the last thing on your mind. You want to see
Right.
your friends, you want to just go back outside again. You want to have recess again, like, and to think like now we have to not only catch them up on the years that they, lacked, we have to still make sure they're up to date and in their current grade level. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, being
Yeah.
an educator in 2024 is it's a professional job for sure.
It's absolutely incredibly challenging, and it's not getting any easier. Even the kids who
Yeah,
weren't in school yet when the pandemic hit, I've known of kids who are now fearful of being
mm,
in large populated areas or in large groups because their first 2 or 3 years of their life, they were isolated. They weren't allowed to
yeah,
go anywhere. They just stayed incubated with their family.
mm,
And so now you have a population of kids who are dealing with that as well. Like, I don't feel comfortable being around all
Right.
these people because they might have and when I'm saying all these people, I mean it could be a small, just the classroom of 25 or 30 kids. But then if you try to take these kids to an auditorium or a gymnasium or a cafeteria where there's hundreds of kids or maybe thousands, they're having severe problems with that.
Yeah, one thing I'm very interested in is the continuance of special education after you graduate high school. Because as we know, when you graduate high school, your IB, you don't have an IB anymore. You've graduated. But we know a high school diploma doesn't, get you as far as it may have used to in decades past. Further your chance of earning in this country. Um, so, do you know of any special education programs or initiatives that are helping kids that are in college?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a specific initiative, I guess. Maybe it is actually, but at every college there and university, whether it's a 2-year college or a 4-year university, there is something like the Student Service Center. And if you have had an IEP in any of your schooling up to that point, you can go to that department and let them know, hey, I had this. Now, as you said, the IEP itself doesn't carry over into college, but because you are then considered an adult with a disability at that education level, not in
Mhm.
actual life, but um, they still will provide you with some of the accommodations. You might not get every accommodation, but you
Right.
probably aren't going to need every accommodation either because you're getting to pick the classes, you're getting to pick the time of day, you're getting to choose, how much homework you're going to do or not do because it is more upon you than anything else at that point. However, if you have a Section 504, which I mentioned before, that will carry you all the way through life. You can
Mhm.
actually take that to your college and university and say, here's my 504. I have these accommodations. You could take it to a trade school. You could take it to a job and say, I have a 504 for this disability and I need these accommodations. So those are two big things. Um, it Learning how to self advocate is
Mhm.
huge, and so we want to make sure before our kids are leaving the high school or they're aging out, however they leave, that we are teaching them and helping them to practice those self advocacy skills of standing up for themselves, saying no to things that are not safe or they don't want to do, being there
Right.
to give them job skills. There are so many job opportunities now that you can find a job almost anywhere at any ability level.
Mhm.
And most people, as I mentioned before, the largest group of people that qualify for special education qualify under that specific learning disability. By the time they're out of high school, they've learned those strategies to
Right.
help them accommodate for themselves how they're going to learn, how much time they have to study, and understand too that in some of these cases, that person may have to still work twice as hard to get as
Mhm.
far as their neighbors just because the way our society is set up. But it's not impossible. It just
Yeah.
might require a little bit more. But there are, I mean,
Yeah.
we do need to do a better job with transition services in the United States because for those who have the most significant needs, there isn't always a lot of help once they're finished with that schooling.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen in definitely my class of students, a lot of kids discouraged from even going to college because they wouldn't have their IP continue. And I
Hmm.
think that that shouldn't discourage anyone. Um,
No.
especially because college is such more of a tailored experience. Um,
Hmm.
it's not you trying to uh, keep up with a curriculum. You set the curriculum that you would like to keep up with. So um, I like that there's I like that there's things in place already that kids can use as resources to get help, like, student services, and, a lot of colleges have tutoring
Mhm.
available. What
Yeah,
do
and
you,
the other thing about sorry, the
yeah,
other
go
thing I
ahead.
just want to mention about
Mhm.
college is we don't have to go full time. We can
Right.
take 1 or 2 classes. I know you talked about setting your own schedule, but I just want to make sure that that's in people's heads too, is
Hmm.
college doesn't have to mean you go live on campus and you go full time and you're
Right.
not getting any support. You can take online classes. You can do, I did this, to be perfectly honest. When I first exited high school, I wanted to pay for my own college. So I started working and I took a few classes or 1 or 2 classes every semester so
Yeah.
that I could work and pay for it as I went. And we
Yeah.
have this very boxed idea of, well, when I talk college, that means you go live on campus and you have a full-time semester every semester and then 4 years and you're done. It doesn't have to look like that.
Yeah. No, it doesn't at all. It's so much. It could be so much more flexible, and like you said, we have kind of this like boxed in view of it that we need to kind of separate from, because not only is everyone's education individualistic, everyone's journey to where they're going to be in life is individualistic. And if, you have kids, or, you work full time, or you just don't have the ability to be a full time student living on campus at a university,
Mhm.
you're not losing anything from not taking that route. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, me personally, uh, I go full time to college, but I waited. I When I graduated high school, I tried out Kent State. I lived on campus. Uh, I realized that that wasn't my scene. Just
Mhm.
living on campus full time away from my family, I didn't like it. So I came home, took a break, worked a couple jobs, and then when I was ready to go back, I had a kind of like a fresh start to it, and now I can take the classes from the comfort of my home, and I wouldn't want it any other way. So it's
Yeah.
it's really up to the individual to set, and that's why college is. That's why, I mean, you pay for it, because you got a lot more freedom than
Mhm.
you do
Yep.
in high school.
Exactly. And that's one great thing about college is it's always there. I
Yeah,
mean, even people that get their, they do the 4 years and they come out with that bachelor's degree 4 years after high school, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40, whatever, they could still go back and get that next level degree if they want to.
yep, yep. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
For anybody who thinks it's going anywhere, it's not going anywhere,
I
and
don't
it's
think it's
never too
going
late.
anywhere. Right.
It's never too late. What are some of the things that you speak on in your book, Those Who Can't Teach?
So earlier you said, and I was really impressed because I wondered if you knew my story behind the title of the book, that kids in special education feel less than.
Mm,
And the title of the book, Those Who Can't is in quotation marks. And then there's an ellipsis behind it because when I was teaching and educating, I heard teachers and I had parents tell me that medical professionals and other family members were saying that their child couldn't, they wouldn't, they can't, they won't. And that always made them feel less than.
yeah,
The saying, those who can do, those who can't teach. There isn't a teacher that I've ever found that loves that saying. And when I
right,
ask them, why don't you love that saying? It's because that saying makes teachers feel less than.
right,
And so I was trying to take the title of the book and turn it upside down and make it that just like teachers teach everybody, every occupation,
yeah,
when we are open and willing to learn from our people who learn differently than us, even if it's not learning differently, even if they're just different than us in some way, we can learn so much and have our horizons expanded greatly.
yeah,
So every chapter in the book, there are 10 chapters. The first chapter speaks to my journey of what I said before, wanting to teach only general education students, to where I
yeah,
am now being so passionate about people eligible for special education. And then the other 9 stories are true stories of 9 different families who just shared with me what their journey of either being the person eligible for special education or having someone in their family who was eligible for special education. The ins, the outs, the highs, the lows, the ugly, the beautiful, and anything else that I didn't mention there.
Yeah.
And I have had such great feedback because people have no idea. And I'll be honest, by the time I wrote the book, I had been in education about 25 years at that point.
Hmm.
You had said at the beginning that I've been in over 25 years. It's over 30 now,
Nice.
which
Nice.
is, I mean, that's so impossible. I mean, your audience can't see me, but I mean, I'm only 36, so I don't know how this is, but um, the idea that these families were sharing so beautifully their stories with me. And they had final editing rights of their own chapter because I
Nice.
wanted to make sure that they got to tell their story the way that they wanted to tell it.
Hmm.
And I have had book studies with groups of teachers who have told me they it's been such an eye opener for them because they
Right.
had no idea. And even myself, like I said, when I was in it for 25 years, and so I thought, I had had the great privilege of working with a lot of my students for many consecutive years, and so I thought I had a pretty good understanding of what it was like. And I
Right.
was so wrong when these families started telling me their stories and really going deep into what their day-to-day lives are like, what their thinking lives are like, how they have to process things and look at things differently than I do, who doesn't have a child that learns differently in that way. I was just blown away. I mean, a thimbleful is really about the amount of knowledge I felt that I had after
Right.
listening to these stories. And so doing these book studies with teachers has been phenomenal because they're having very similar reactions that I did. But it's for anyone truly who wants to know what it might be like in their neighbor's house or maybe in their sibling's house or maybe in, some coworkers of theirs house. It really does speak to everyone. But I do think that teachers have been the ones most affected by it so far.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think, I mean, it's the age-old story of educators being undervalued and not looked at as meaningful members of society when they're, in fact, probably the most meaningful members of society. Um,
Mhm.
Literally, our future is a direct product of our educators and how seriously they take their job.
Yep,
So,
I agree.
yeah, and I talk about the future a lot on this podcast, and a lot of times people ask me, well, you talk so much about the future. Do you think where do you think the future gonna go? Do you believe that world peace is ever gonna happen? And people ask me all sorts of questions like that about the future, and I tell them every time it's up to the kids, up to the children, and the examples we set is going to be, it's going to be a small factor, but it's going to be a factor on where they take it because it's up to them.
Yeah,
Um, and I think
it's a
this new
great answer.
generation, yeah, I mean this generation, I think what is it, Z now?
I think so. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, they're a different one, and they have different challenges to face than what my generation did. But I think they're a lot more sensitive. But that's a good thing. I think we kind of view sensitivity and vulnerability as like some sort of weakness and some sort of like inability to last in the real world. But I think their sensitivity is what's gonna foster uh, a new world, hopefully, that where we can understand each other on deeper levels and not, view ourselves as these rigid, two-dimensional categories of people. So that's my hope for the future. And I think what you do in special education is a huge part of that because it further emphasizes how different we are as individuals and how much we are actually the same because no matter who or how you learn or how comfortable you are in a school setting. I think special education is the glue that keeps everybody together at the same time, because if there wasn't special education, it would just be, you know, a lot of kids with a lot of like wants and needs that need to be fulfilled that would just be left to
Right.
the wind. Um, so I think special education is super important in keeping everyone connected and keeping the glue between all kids and all of the youth. And what is your um, opinion on um, where kind of special education can go, like a new avenues, new insights, and new places you think it can go in the future?
I think where I would like it to go is making sure that we are lessening the gap. Unfortunately, I still think the gap gets bigger for students when they come into special education because there's too many people that have that attitude of it's less than,
Hmm.
and we don't have the right approach. And because their education is tied to promised money that the government has never fulfilled that promise, then our
Yeah,
students are looked at as a cost problem.
right,
And so I would like to see both of those perspectives changed, that when we are educating all of our students to reach their best potential, then it's better for everyone in the future. Because as you said, our children are our future. And I hate to tell you this, but Whitney Houston said that first in a song a long, long time ago.
nice.
um, but that's something that I have believed. It was a song when she sang that came out when I was a teenager, early 20s. And it is definitely something that I believe, that they are our future and we should teach them well and let them lead the way.
Yeah,
And we have gotten away from that. I think education started out that way, but we have forgotten. And I'll be honest, I probably was similar to this thinking when I was teaching full time just a few years ago, even, that we have to prepare them for college. No, we don't. We have to prepare them for life,
yeah,
because they are going to be living a life. They're not always going to be in school. But as educators, we've unintentionally gotten into this idea, because it's our life, that
right,
school is all there is. And
right,
so we, we don't understand the corporate world. We don't understand any world outside of education. And nobody has done that on purpose. Nobody has said, oh, well, school's the only thing there is, and that's all I'm going to teach you about.
right,
But I was very blessed to have a spouse who worked in the corporate world, and he kept my mind on the fact that, oh yeah, these kids aren't, I don't have them only to teach them about what it's like in the grade that I have them now, or in the subject that I'm working in with them now. I am training them, teaching them to be productive members of society.
yes,
And so I would really like for our schools to get back to that idea, that we are working with every potential job that will be out there in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And we have to teach things like critical thinking and self advocacy and problem solving, as well as the academics that go along with those skills.
right,
I feel like we've gotten kind of stuck in only focusing on certain academics, and this is the way you have to think, versus what do you think about this?
hmm,
How would this affect you in life? How could this affect you in life? And remembering
yeah,
that that's the point of education, is to raise up productive members of society, whether that's general or special education. So I'd like to see the government give the money that was promised. I think that would alleviate a lot of the bad perspective from administrators who are having to help, hundreds or thousands of students in their school district, And then you have a particular population that's absorbing more of the money because legally they're required to provide certain services, but
Hmm.
they've never been given the funding fully to do that. So I think that would help if
Yeah.
people didn't have to think about the money side of things when it comes to how am I going to provide? Because I think most educators and administrators that I've ever met, I think they truly want to do the things, but then they look at that checkbook and they're like, I just don't have it. And now we don't
Hmm.
have staff either. We don't have teachers
Yeah.
because of the massive shortage that we have. So we have to get that respect back for our teachers. And if that's making the programs more rigorous, we talk about that for our elementary and our high school students, but maybe we need to make our college programs that are training our teachers more rigorous as well.
Hmm.
And then we could maybe get some of that respect back.
Great points, great opinions. I concur with all of them. I think that we need to place more value on educating our educators, making the coursework more rigorous to be, even become a teacher, and but at the same time, um, encourage more people to become teachers because we do have a shortage. And uh, if there was more government funding, there would be, I think, more incentive to become a teacher. I think a lot of kids that go into education and fall in love with the aspect of teaching and fall in love with the craft of um, teaching the youth, they might get into it and then quickly find that they are having a hard time supporting themselves financially. So I think that that's definitely up to the government to solve. Um, and that's not even a money issue. It's just a money allocation issue. It's not like we don't have the money. It's just we're spending it on the wrong things. Um, so yeah, I think if you make anything a money problem, then it gets kind of thrown to the wayside because as we're talking about literal children here, we're talking about kids
Right.
that just want to grow up and chase their dreams and pursue their passions. It should never be a cost problem. It should never be up to $1 if a kid is eligible to receive a service. So
Yeah. But
yeah,
unfortunately, all that costs money and there has to
yeah,
be money to pay for it.
yeah,
The people, like you said, we need to pay our teachers better.
yeah,
Um, I mean, when I consider how much education I need to maintain my license and how little I get paid to do that compared to other careers that have to, have a 4-year degree and then maybe they don't have to keep up their license or their certifications or whatever. Or if they do, they're constantly getting raises or bonuses because they're doing that.
right,
Educators don't get that. They have to do that continuous in most states. I think there are a few states where the requirements to become a teacher are such that they don't have to do as many or maybe any what I call continuing education. But I mean, doctors have to get continuing education, and look how much we pay doctors.
yeah,
Um, I,
right,
I saw I saw a cartoon just before joining you today, and it was like the Far Side or something was the from the cartoon company, and it had a
mm,
teacher driving by in a limousine, and it had two sports players standing on the side of the road. And this is coming. I mean, we're doing this right after the Super Bowl, so this is
right,
incredibly relevant right now. But it said from these sports players, like, oh, there goes that $10 million a year teacher, for what he or she does every year, and here I am, a professional athlete, and I'm just barely making it. And
yeah,
I mean, when you have millions of people tuning in to a national football game or a national baseball game and the enormous amounts of money that they pay to go to these events live or concerts. It's not just athletes. I don't want to rip just on athletes. It's
yeah,
all of our celebrities, whatever category somebody falls into to become a celebrity. We spend so much of our money for entertainment. We'd rather
yeah,
be entertained, and this is society at large, than put money into our children which would then return to us in the future.
Yes, indeed. Like you said before, I
Sorry, I
think it's
can get
up
on
to
a
the.
soapbox about teachers' salaries.
Oh no,
As I'm sure you just saw.
I am an advocate for paying teachers more, and I think it's not as difficult as people may seem. Um I think you could just easily implement a not even a tax. I think you could just implement a policy to where if you have a large corporation that's receiving a lot of advertising dollars, um, in whatever state or city that corporation is in, they have to dedicate some of their profit to the schools that surround that corporation. I mean, you have a giant around my house. There's a giant Amazon factory that makes billions and billions of dollars every day, and you know it wouldn't take much to just cut off a little off the top and give it around to the local schools. Um, Same with hotels or uh, gas stations, sports arenas. Anywhere that's making money every single day, they should they should be required to give back to the schools around them, and not in the way that they do it now, where they give the kids like, they'll send an athlete to their school, and they'll get some jerseys or something. Like, they need to actually forward the money to the actual board of education so things can change. And I'm hopefully with more dialogues like this and with more advocates uh, for education, over time we'll hopefully get somebody in office that cares about these types of things.
And it's not so much just the person sitting in the desk at the office.
Yeah.
It's all of the people that supported, it's lobbyists, it's
Yeah.
people saying, I'm not going to worry about my own pocket as much as I'm going to worry about society at large. Not that you can't have a big pocket. I don't want to say that, somebody who's worked hard and who, has built up an empire because of their knowledge and whatever, that they need to pay for everything for everybody. But
Yeah.
when we start to look at society as a whole and what can I do to help my neighbor versus how do I keep this for myself,
Hmm.
we'll do better.
Yeah, I mean, investing in the kids is investing in the future. So if you would like to live in a world where your kids would like to live in,
Mm-hmm.
that would be the first investment, is investing in education. Um, that's all the questions I have for today, Shelley. I really appreciate you coming on my podcast and explaining everything in regards to special education. I think a lot of people and a lot of listeners will be able to take away a lot, and hopefully they have, you know, shed some of the stigmas they may have had um, when it comes to special education and children that use an IEP. I think what you've been able to present to people today would not only encourage parents to maybe take a look and get their kids in special education, but a lot of kids that are in special education just feel more confident about themselves and know that there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing different. But they are different, but different in a positive way. It's not differences are something that's negative. Differences are something that should be celebrated.
Absolutely.
So I
Thank you
thank
for
you.
having me.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed being here.
Yeah. Where can the people find you and keep up with everything you're doing?
I am on Instagram, Facebook. My live stream / podcast is on YouTube, and then the podcast version. So I started the live stream several years ago, and I've now gone back and started releasing the episodes as podcasts. So the actual podcast, pretty much anywhere that you listen to podcasts, just type in "No Limits" with Shelley Kenow. If you look it up on YouTube, it's just same thing. Basically, just type in #No Limits and Shelley Kenow. And then you can find me on Facebook and Shelley Kenow. I don't know if you're going to put show notes in or not, but my first name is SHELLEYKENOW.com is my website. So, and you can email me, Shelley@ShelleyKenow.com. Did I mention that I'm on LinkedIn too? I just feel like I'm everywhere.
Nice. Nice. Everybody go take a deeper look, listen to our podcast. And I want to thank you again for coming on my show. And I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You as well.
Thanks.
I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living.
Bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Totally unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new era.
No, don't clap, man, because I got more
And Hillary are demons. Feeling peace in our time.
Most people still want to run for vote.
Peace in all time.